Welcome to your practice session for class 8.2 on area and circles. So let's get started. I've got 16 problems here that we're going to work through. This is going to be a little bit different from what we do in class because what I'm going to ask you to do is to pause this video and try to work out the problem on your own and then continue to see the solution. And I will give you a little bit of a prompt in order to pause. So I will introduce the problem first and then have you pause and then we'll go from there. What is the area of the figure? Round your answer to the nearest tenth. So you have to identify the figure, find the formula, and then substitute the values. So pause your screen now. All right, I'm going to continue now and do the solution. So you should have paused and worked out the problem on your own, and you should have identified this as a rectangle. And the area for a rectangle is pretty straightforward. It is the length times the width, and we don't worry about which one is width, which. We just want the two sides of the rectangle, and we're going to multiply those. So I don't think our geometry formulas get any easier than this. And we've got decimals, so we're going to use the calculator. 10.5 times 3.4 should give you 35.7 square units. All right, let's move on to the next question. What is the area of the figure? Same thing, identify the figure, apply the formula, or find the formula, find the values you need, and substitute. Pause the video now. All right, welcome back. In this problem, we have a triangle. So we look up our area formula for the triangle, which is 1/2 base times height. Now, you look at this triangle and you might be a little bit confused because there are 4 numbers and we know that we only need 2. This is where it becomes important to be able to identify base and height. So height is usually the easier of the two because it's often a dotted line. So we know that our height is 6. So we have 1/2. And we're looking for our base. And remember that the height points to the base. So this must be the base down here. And we want to use 20 for that value. So 1/2 times 20 times 6. And the answer you get when you multiply that out is 60. Now, we didn't use the values 15 and 7. That's okay. We want to learn to ignore the ones that aren't necessary to calculate the area. Next problem. Once again, we have a different kind of figure here. Look up the formula, substitute the values. Pause the video now. All right, we're back. Hopefully you identified this as a trapezoid and you looked up the area for a trapezoid. How do we know it's a trapezoid? Because it looks kind of like a wedge. 1/2 times the height times B1 plus B2. And as soon as we see that formula, we're reminded, oh yeah, trapezoids have 2 bases. So here's one of our bases. Here's the other base. How do I know that? Because the bases in a trapezoid are connected by the height. So here is our height, 6. It is pointing to our 2 bases, 4 and 11. And that's all we need, a height and 2 bases. So we substitute. H is 6. And our bases are 4 and 11. So we have 1/2. That looks sort of like a G. 1/2 times 6 times 4 plus 11. That is 45. you want to do these with your calculator, if at all possible, because a lot of times these numbers will have decimals in them and you're going to need to use a calculator. If you're good with the mental math there, that's perfectly fine to do that in your head, but I would encourage you to be leaning toward the calculator. Next problem. Of course, we have a different shape here. Identify the shape, find the formula, and substitute your values. Pause the video now. All right, I'm going to solve this one now. So our formula is pretty simple for a parallelogram. It's just base times height. And we follow that principle where it's easiest to find the height first. So we know that our height is 9. We're going to multiply the base times that height, and our height is pointed toward the base. Because our height has to be perpendicular to the base, it is the distance between these parallel lines. So that is going to be 18 times 9. We are ignoring 9.7 because that's not necessary. And 18 times 9 is 162. Hopefully you got that. If not, try it again based on what you might have learned through that explanation. We're moving on to area and circumference of circles. Now, for these problems, what I would like you to do is find both the area and the circumference. So we're going to be practicing both of those things at the same time. So I just want to point out that in this case, with this circle, before you get started, this is half of the width of the circle, 8 feet. All right, pause the video. All right, let's take a look at the solution to this. And I'm going to do this both in terms of pi and as a decimal. I should have mentioned to you before that that would be a good idea. If you didn't do it that way while I'm working this out, you can do that as well. So let's start out with area. Area equals pi r squared. And because we were given half of the width of the circle, that is our radius. We don't have to make any adjustment to that. So I hope you didn't divide that by 2. We just want to use 8 as our radius. So that is going to be pi times 8 squared, which is going to be 64 pi. That is the value in terms of pi. And then as a decimal, we hit the toggle button. I'm relying on my notes here. 201.1, or about that, is the area for that. Now, this is why I recommend that you use the formula for circumference involving radius, because then it doesn't matter whether we're finding area or circumference. We know that we can do it with the radius. Circumference equals 2 times pi times the radius. That equals 2 times pi times 8, which equals 16 times pi. And that may be the form of the answer, but you might look at the multiple choice answers and see that they're in decimal. So then you have to hit that toggle button next to your enter key and convert that to a decimal, which is 50.3. All right, let's do a very similar problem to that. There's one little twist to this problem. Hopefully you will pick it up. It's time to pause the video and work it out on your own. Okay, let's solve this one. You might have been wondering what I was talking about with the little twist. Well, that twist is that we were given the whole width of the circle, which is pretty common. Like if we're talking about a pizza, we talk about the whole width of the pizza, not half of it. So in order to get the radius, which is half of it, we need to divide this by 2. So the radius of our circle is 12 divided by 2 equals 6. And that's the number that we want to work with in our formulas. So once again, the area is pi times r squared, but we're good to go because we found r. We want to ignore the diameter. That's going to be pi times 6 squared. So that is 36 pi in terms of pi. And as a decimal, we hit the toggle button and we get 113.1. And that would be in units of square feet. Then we go to calculate the circumference of that same circle. And we use the 2 times pi times r formula because, once again, it uses r. And that is 2 times pi times 6, which is 12 pi. And then we use the toggle button and we convert that to 37.7. And now the units of this are feet because circumference is just a distance. Area is an amount of space. So always keep those units in mind. So those were all problems where we didn't have multiple choice to rely on. I think all of the rest of the questions, we do have multiple choice. Here is an example. I'll let you read through that problem, pause the video now, work out your solution, and then continue when ready. All right. Hopefully that problem looked familiar to you, even though, we've got sort of a real world picture here. We have an irrigation circle. We are given a dimension here. We're not told whether that is the radius or the diameter, but because the arrow is half of the circle, that is a radius, and we don't need to make any adjustment to that. So don't divide that by 2. Don't multiply it by 2. That's what we want, the radius. We are asked to find the area. You want to be very careful that you're solving for the right thing. The area is equal to pi r squared. So looking at these answers, we notice that these are not the final answers. This is how we would put it in the calculator. So you want to be aware of that before you do your work. So you say, okay, that's going to be pi times 400 squared because my radius is squared. Let's look at the answers. And now we notice that all of these involve this number 3.14. So at this point, we better replace pi with 3.14 so that our answer looks similar to their answer. And we notice that this is 3.14 times 400 squared. That looks just like option C. So let's look at the mistakes that were made in these other options. What went wrong with A? Well, that looks like we found the diameter and then squared it. That's not the way the formula works. In option B, we squared pi. You will never square pi, so it will never be 3.14 squared. And option D is actually the formula for the circumference. That would have found the circumference. So sometimes it's helpful to note the kind of mistakes that they will plant in the answers to try to trick you. Okay, the diameter of a circle is 7.5 inches. What is the radius as a decimal? I'll pause the video and work out your solution and come back when ready. All right, we're back. So if the diameter is given, we want to divide the diameter by 2. Now, this is an example where we're given a fraction and we're asked for a decimal. So we might as well convert this fraction to a decimal before we even divide. So 7.5. And then we divide by 2 and we get 3.75 as our answer. 3.75. Answer C. All right. Let's continue on. The perimeter of a square is 44 feet. What is the area of the square? This one might be a little bit tricky. Pause the video. All right, let me explain this problem. So let me draw a square, try to draw a square. There's a pretty good square. And our square has a perimeter of 44 feet. Now, what we know about a square is that the sides are all the same. So if the sides are all the same, we could find the length of a side by dividing by 4. 44 divided by 4 is 11. So the sides of our square are all 11. That makes sense. We add up 11, we get 44. What is the area of a square? All we have to do is apply the area of a rectangle. A square is just a special rectangle, so we might as well use the rectangle formula. Area equals length times width equals 11 times 11, which equals 121. Answer C. So a little bit of a two-step problem. We're given the perimeter. We have to figure out the length of the side. Once we know the length of the side, we can find the area. This is an example of how we can make an area problem with a circle a little bit more complicated. Wally ordered a pizza for a group of friends and decided to get 2 medium 12-inch pizzas instead of one large 18-inch pizza because it seemed like he would get more pizza. Was Wally correct? And for what was the result? So I'm going to pause this video, let you work on that, and then show you a solution. I should have said you pause the video. Sorry about that. I'm sure you understood what I meant. All right. So I call this kind of a 2-for-1 problem in terms of the amount of work. We have to find the area of 2 different circles and do a little bit of work in order to answer this question. We're talking about, when we talk about how much pizza, first of all, that's an area question. So we want our area formula. Area equals pi times r squared. And I talked about how when we say a 12-inch pizza, that's a diameter. So we want to be thinking about half of that. Let me show that in red as being our radius. Our radius for a 12-inch pizza is 6. And I might as well move over to the 18-inch pizza and immediately say, well, the radius for that is going to be 18 divided by 2. That's 9. So now I'm kind of ready to go. I've got my radius. Area equals pi r squared. Area equals pi times 6 squared. And for this kind of problem, we just want to go right to the decimal version. I mean, you can get the 36 pi. There's nothing wrong with that. But then use the toggle button and get the decimal version. And that is 113.1 square inches for each pizza. Each. So now we need to multiply that by 2. 113.1 times 2. Oops, got ahead of myself there. Times 2 equals 226.2 square inches in both pizzas. Okay, now we're ready to compare that to the larger pizza. But we've already done similar work here. So it's going to be pi times 9 squared in this case. That's going to be 81 pi. And then we convert 81 pi to a decimal, and we get 254.5 square inches. Now we're prepared to answer the question. He got more pizza with the large 18-inch than he did the two mediums. So we know that he was not correct. So we want to choose between B and C. But what is the right reason? Did he get 28 inches less, or did he get 114 inches less? So we just subtract these. 254.5 minus 226.2, and we find out that the answer to that is about 28. So we go with answer B. No, Wally was not correct. He got 28 square inches less by buying the two medium pizzas. So that question is quite a bit of work. We had to find the area for two different circles. We had to multiply one of them by 2. We had to subtract at the end. We had to keep it straight what the question was. So a pretty messy example of a circle question, an area of a circle question, I should say. What is the area of the shaded portion of the figure? Pause the video and resume when you're ready. All right, let's continue. What they want you to do in this problem is realize that the shaded portion is a particular shape. I'm drawing it right now to maybe make it clearer with the red lines. Maybe you see it now if you didn't see it before. That's a trapezoid. What they're also kind of requiring you to do is ignore all of this stuff because that has nothing to do with our trapezoid. So they're trying to confuse you a little bit with that extra information. But now that we know that it's a trapezoid, we're kind of good to go. We look up our formula. Area equals 1/2 times the height times base 1 plus base 2. And we're a little bit confused because there's no dotted line. But we remember that sometimes a side of a trapezoid can be the height. And it's going to happen when these are right angles, because that means that this is still the distance at right angles between the two bases. So our height is 10. So we get 1/2 times 10. And then our height is pointing to our two bases. And those are the only two numbers that we have left. So 9 plus 11. And we get our answer of 105 for the area of that trapezoid. Not too bad once we realize that they're talking about the shaded portion being trapezoid. This is kind of an example of what we would call a combined figure question, meaning we've got different shapes being described in our problem, and we need to do some math with the area of those two shapes. So with that little bit of a hint, go ahead and pause the video and then come back when ready. I just noticed that there's a little typo in that problem in the word green that I'll have to go back and fix. All right. The dimensions of a house and property are shown below. The green portion will be painted with grass. What is the area that will be planted with grass? So if we treat this outside bigger rectangle as our first area, we would say that the area equals the length times the width, which is 140 times 80. So let's calculate what that is. We're talking about the outer rectangle. That is 11,200. And you probably did that as part of working out the problem. But that's not the answer to our question because that bigger rectangle includes this rectangle. And there's going to be no grass planted where the house is. So we need to subtract that from this shape. So we need to find the area to subtract. So that area, I will call it for the house, is equal to length times width again, 40 times 25. And 40 times 25 is, go ahead and calculate that if you didn't before, 1,000. So we need to subtract the 1,000 square feet where the house is from the 11,000 square feet that is like the whole yard. And that's it. 11,200 minus 1,000 leaves us with 10,200 square feet. Answer A. What is the area of the figure? Pause the video, work out your solution, come back when ready. All right, just a basic triangle here. It is a right triangle. And I noted in the lesson how sometimes a right triangle will not have a dotted line for a side because one of the sides is actually the height. So if we think about this side, typically the bottom of a triangle is going to be your base, not always, but usually. That must mean that this is the height. Oops, wrong drawing tool. This is the height to the peak of our triangle from our base. So there is H, and here is B, and our formula for the area of our triangle is 1/2 base times height, 1/2 times 18 times 12.5. And when you're putting this in your calculator, just a reminder, I think it's easier to use decimals for 1/2. So 0.5 times 18 times 12.5. And what do we get for an answer to that? 112.5. Answer C. The four sides of a rectangle measure 11, 7, 11, and 7. What is the area of the rectangle? Pause the video and return when ready. Okay, we're back. So this is no picture here. So they're expecting you to kind of visualize this. This isn't too challenging. We know that a rectangle has a longer side and a shorter side, and that's exactly what they've given us here is longer dimensions and shorter. And when they read off the sides, they're talking about in order. So we might start out here and say, this is 11, and this is 7, and this is 11, and this is 7. And that makes perfect sense. And we know that the area of a triangle is length times width. This might be one of those formulas that you want to remember. 11 times 7 equals 77. It becomes a little tricky when they're describing it in words. So it is usually helpful in problems like that to make a picture. All right, I think we have Three more to go here. Let's get to the next question. The diameter of a circle is 8 1/4 inches. What is the radius as a fraction? Pause the video and come back when ready. All right, we're back. So whenever we are given the diameter, we want to divide by 2 to get the radius. The radius is diameter divided by 2. In this case, we have a fraction, so maybe you want to use the fraction function on your calculator if you're not comfortable with doing this manually. But 8 1/4 divided by 2 should give you 4 1/8. Another way that you could do that would be to convert 8 1/4 into a decimal and divide by 2, and you will get 4.125. But then you have to convert that back to a fraction in order to figure out that, hey, that matches up with 4 1/8. What is the area of the triangular park? So we have this park. We're given 3 dimensions for the triangle that the park creates. Pause the video and come back when ready. Sometimes problems involving area of triangles look more confusing when they're kind of a realistic picture, but don't let that throw you. This is just a triangle, and we're going to use the same formula, 1/2 base times height. And frequently, the base is at the bottom of our triangle. So let me draw a line there. Here is the base. And this looks like a right triangle. So a lot of times with a right triangle, your height might be one of the sides. And that's the case here. So this is our height in this direction. So we label that as h equals 120. And our base is 150. And we are good to go. 1/2 times our base of 150 times our height of 120. Again, sometimes helpful to use 0.5 so that you're not involving fractions in this calculation. And the answer to this question is D, 9,000 square feet. All right, that wraps up our practice session. I hope that that was helpful. I do encourage you to do the video plus practice exercises as always for today's class, and then either do that after the homework or before the homework, depending on how comfortable you feel with these concepts right now. All right, have a good day, everyone.